I'm Adélie Pojzman-Pontay, and this is Ukraine, the latest. Today, as mass attacks struck Ukraine overnight, we continue to analyse the latest developments from Washington, as Trump, when probed by reporters, seemed to shy away from the promises he'd made to Zelensky on July 4th. Then, we have a conversation on the role of music in cultural diplomacy and in the rehabilitation of wounded soldiers.
Bravery takes you through the most unimaginable hardships to finally reward you with victory.
Russia does not want peace.
Erstens, wir verteidigen mit unserer Hilfe für die Ukraine auch unsere Freiheit und unsere europäischen Werte.
If I'm president, I will have that war settled in one day, 24 hours.
We are with you, not just today or tomorrow, but for 100 years.
Nous ne pouvons pas, comme Européens, laisser gagner la Russie en Ukraine.
Nobody's going to break us. We're strong. We're Ukrainians.
It's Wednesday, the 16th of July, 3 years and 144 days since the full-scale invasion began. I'm joined by Joe Barnes, our Brussels correspondent, and Mykolai Sierga, founder of the Cultural Forces of Ukraine, a unit of army veterans who are also artists and travel around Ukraine and the world. But first, let's go to Joe for the military updates.
I think we start with yet another predictable set of Russian attacks on Ukrainian cities designed to sow terror amongst the population. Our friends at the Kyiv Independent had a striking headline to accompany their coverage of the attacks this morning. Mass attack hits cities as Ukrainians brace for 50 more days of terror, a reference to the 50-day deadline set by Donald Trump to Vladimir Putin to come to the negotiating table or face extra American sanctions and tariffs. What actually happened? Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky said there were response efforts underway across the regions of Vinnytsia, Dnipro and Kharkiv after the attack, which he added was particularly targeting energy infrastructure. He said, unfortunately, 15 people were injured, including one child. Russia is not changing its strategy, and to counter this terror effectively, we need to systematically strengthen our defences. More air defence systems, more interceptors, and more determination so Russia feels our response. End quote. So according to warnings from Ukraine's Air Force, it was a combination of a single ballistic missile and hundreds of drones that were used by Russia. So it's by no means the largest in recent weeks, but it was still pretty sizable. In a statement that Ukraine's Air Force said, Russia had used 400 different types of drones, so 400 drones in total, and one Iskander ballistic missile, and came from multiple directions. So from Russia itself, from Crimea, basically all around. Ukraine's Air Force managed to shoot down, according to its statement, 198 Shahed-type drones. 145 decoy drones were lost or downed by electronic warfare jammers. There was one missile strike and 57 drone strikes recorded across 12 locations. I guess a sad but familiar start to our podcasts these days. To the front line, not a lot to report here. Sort of lots of positional jostling across the areas that we know there are fighting. In the northern Sumy region, Ukrainian forces have launched a tiny bit of a counterattack and managed to reclaim and advance in that region. So footage geolocated by the Institute of the Study of War indicates that the advance happened in Kindarivka, which is just north of Sumy city towards the border with Russia. This was into the territory that Russia has seized in recent weeks and months as its attempt to create a buffer zone in northern Ukraine to protect that international border, which Ukraine stormed across during the Kursk offensive, and more crucially to sort of move barreled artillery into range of Sumy city. Moving to the Kharkiv region, ISW, the Institute of Study of War, said there were assessed Russian advances. So geolocated footage published on July 14th indicates that Russian forces recently advanced north of Krasnopersh, which is just northeast of Kupiansk, so a city that we know well. It was occupied in the early days of the war, reclaimed by Ukraine during its counteroffensive in sort of September 2022. And now the Russians are once again trying to sort of capture that land. In Luhansk, there appears to have been a number of Russian offensive operations, but no major advances. We know the Russians are actively trying to take the remainder of Luhansk. But the same goes for the southern regions of Zaporizhzhia and Kherson. There have been some reported Russian offensive operations, but no real massive exchanges of territory. There have been some minor advances in Donetsk, though, to report around the city of Terets. And then there's also looks to be some pockets developing around the two major cities in Donetsk, which basically help underpin its defense. So looking at deep state maps, the sort of well-known Ukrainian tracking website, you can see these almost pockets where Russia has been, instead of directly moving into Konstantinivka and Pokrovsk, it's been trying to make its way around the edges, and actually some quite horrible looking pockets seem to be emerging there where Russia is advancing even at a slow and grinded rate. So it's not good news, because the fall of these cities would essentially threaten the rest of the key strongholds holding together Ukraine's defense of Donetsk, and would sort of be a massive blow if they were to fall. But they are still hanging on, so nothing really major to report from the front lines. Ukraine does appear to be doing a relatively good job of stabilising the situation there. We've had months of Russian advances, but they have sort of very much slowed. But I'll move to some updates on Russia's use of chemical weapons and chemical warfare. Yesterday in Brussels, where I'm currently situated, Kaja Kallas, the European Union's top diplomat, so that's Wednesday, used part of a press conference following a meeting of European Union foreign ministers to speak about Russia's use of chemical weapons, which she said shows that Russia wants to cause as much pain and suffering as possible so that Ukraine would surrender. It's really unbearable. And what was Kaja Kallas citing? She was citing reports by the German and Dutch military intelligence services that suggests that Russian forces have now conducted more than 9,000 chemical weapon attacks since the start of the full-scale invasion in February 2022. I think it's most common that Russia is using crowd control agents, similar to tear gas, which they will either lob into or use drones to drop into Ukrainian trenches, making it basically impossible to breathe, bringing Ukraine out of their defensive positions and then enabling them to sort of attack while the Ukrainians are sort of startled and disorientated. Most importantly, this is against the Geneva Convention, so that's why politicians like Kaja Kallas are raising this subject.
Absolutely. Thank you, Joe. It falls on me to do the diplomatic updates today. The big story of the last couple of days, as Dom and Francis have discussed and analysed at length in yesterday's episode, is the latest news and announcements coming from the US, and this story keeps on developing as there have been updates like last night. So just to recap, a Financial Times article yesterday gave some clarity on conversations held between Zelensky and President Trump on July 4th that announced that Patriot systems would be bought by NATO from the US in order to be delivered to Ukraine, and that Trump was giving a 50-day time frame to come to a peace deal to Russia before it would impose new sanctions and tariffs, 100% tariffs on Russia, to force Putin to come to the negotiating table. So I would refer you to yesterday's episode for more in-depth conversation on these two announcements. In the conversations between Trump and Zelensky that are reported in the Financial Times article, the US president asked whether Ukraine could strike Moscow and St. Petersburg to make Russia feel the pain, I quote there, and I quote again the American sentiment among many top aides that's mentioned in the Financial Times article, to bring the war to the Muscovites. There was another article in the Washington Post yesterday night that took a stab at breaking down Trump's new strategy. I'm going to quote them there because I think it's laid out very well. Trump decided to escalate for 3 reasons, according to a source familiar with the administration discussions. First, he believed that Putin was disrespecting him, feigning a readiness to make peace, but ignoring the US president's call for a ceasefire. Second, he saw the efficacy of US military power in the use of B-2 bombers and Tomahawk missiles against Iran. And third, he thought Putin would only negotiate if threatened with greater force. As the Russians like to say, Trump decided to escalate to de-escalate. The Washington Post leaves us with one crucial question. The one question that Trump didn't want to answer in Monday's Oval Office session was, if Putin decides to escalate further, how far is he willing to go in response? And that is the big unknown in the situation at present. But in an update last night, Trump addressed reporters as he was leaving the White House and once again changed his tune, saying that Zelensky should not target Moscow and that the US is not looking to supply long-range missiles to Kyiv, a sharp departure from what had been the main headlines for the last few hours. Commenting on the Financial Times report earlier in the day, the White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt said in a statement to Newsweek that she accused the newspaper of taking words wildly out of context. And she added, President Trump was merely asking a question, not encouraging further killing. He's working tirelessly to stop the killing and end this war. When asked by reporters yesterday night why Trump gave Putin such an extended deadline, Trump said he didn't think it was a significant amount of time. I don't think 50 days is very long. I think the Ukrainians in cities being bombed every day, as you mentioned, Joe, would disagree. Now, we've all become accustomed at this stage to the Trump roller coaster, where Trump's position is either very changeable or kept vague on purpose. Until the weapon systems are indeed on Ukraine's soil, it's hard to tell whether any of these announcements should be taken seriously and will go ahead. Part of that is not simply about Trump, it's also about NATO's response and the consensus on making the mechanisms to bring these weapon systems all the way to Ukraine. This morning, Politico and La Stampa in Italy announced that France and Italy would not take part in a new NATO-led initiative to finance the delivery of US weapons to Ukraine, both newspapers citing undisclosed government officials in each of those countries. France declined to join the plan because President Emmanuel Macron's push for European nations to strengthen their own defence industries by purchasing domestically produced arms. And I think the subtext here is purchasing potentially French-produced arms, while he's also contending with domestic budget constraints. There's a lot of budget conversations going on in the French Parliament this very week. Italy, meanwhile, cites also fiscal limitations and the country's focus on different technological systems, such as the Italian-French-made SAMPT air defense system that is already being supplied to Ukraine. According to La Stampa, Italy is currently assessing a NATO request to support the logistical transport of US-supplied weapons, whether that's by air, rail or sea, and has signalled it will not, I quote, shy away from contributing. The specific nature and scale of Italy's commitment has yet to be determined. Now, let's say those weapons were to reach Ukraine and to be used for deep strikes in Russia. It would be a significant change from the last 3 years and from the doctrine coming from the US in the last 3 years. Previously, the Financial Times points out, Ukraine has asked for Tomahawk missiles, which both of the Trump and Biden administration has had expressed concerns about Ukraine's potential lack of restraint in using them. One of the weapons discussed during the July 4th meeting was the Army Tactical Missile Systems, or ATACMS, which have a range of 300 kilometers, shorter than the Tomahawk, and would not be able to reach either Moscow or St. Petersburg. After Ukraine fired these last November towards targets inside Russia, Moscow had published an updated version of its nuclear doctrine that lowered the threshold for potential use. The changes could envision a Russian nuclear first strike against the US, the UK, and France. Washington, back then, had warned Ukraine about deep strikes against Russia, but these lines now appear to be moving, or to be blurring. It's difficult to say. Although the Washington Post does report that Tomahawk missiles are for now off the shopping list. After the announcements yesterday, Dmitry Medvedev, the deputy chair of Russia's Security Council, shrugged off Trump's decision. He wrote on X, Trump issued a theatrical ultimatum to the Kremlin. Russia didn't care. The editor-in-chief of the magazine Russia in Global Affairs, Fyodor Lukyanov, described Trump's announcement as moderate in comments published in the major Russian newspaper Kommersant. He said, if you squeeze the essence out of Donald Trump's speech in the White House, this is what you get. He still really doesn't want to become a party to the conflict. In other words, to get involved in a full-fledged confrontation with Russia at full capacity. Similar views were published by pro-Russian military bloggers, the highly influential nationalist voices that share insider war coverage and analysis of events, primarily on Telegram in Russia. One of them, known as Two Majors, who has more than 1.25 million subscribers, wrote, "The biggest chatterbox of the planet, talked a lot and was engaged in self-promotion. Well, in 50 days, he will be so angry he might even write a post on social media." That does say a lot about how seriously the Trump roller coaster is taken inside Russia. And a last piece of news, but not the least from me, Joe, is news from inside Ukraine and their domestic politics, as the Prime Minister of Ukraine, Denis Shmyhal, handed in his resignation to President Zelensky yesterday after the president announced a reshuffle earlier in the week. The Ukrainian parliament is scheduled to vote on the dismissal today. Zelensky has recommended Yulia Sviridenko, the first deputy prime minister and economy minister, to lead the government. Denis Shmyhal, who has served as prime minister since 2020, might be appointed the new defense minister, while the current defense chief, Rustem Umerov, is being floated as a possible ambassador to the US. Zelensky, on X, added, "The key priorities are increasing domestic weapons production in Ukraine, fully contracting the required volumes of all types of drones for Ukraine's defense forces, carrying out substantial deregulation and unlocking our country's internal economic potential, and ensuring full implementation of social support programs for our people." If the parliament supports Shmyhal's resignation, the government resigns and lawmakers have up to 30 days to vote on the next prime minister. On Monday afternoon, a group of 8 Ukrainian army veterans in full fatigues came to the Telegraph for an interview. They're the Cultural Forces of Ukraine, a unit that brings together artists, musicians, photographers, poets, in order to bring culture to the soldiers on the front line, but also abroad. I spoke with their founder, Mykolai Sierga. Mykolai, thank you very much for coming to the Telegraph today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
You are the founder of Cultural Forces Ukraine. Do you want to just explain to our listeners what you're doing and what cultural diplomacy is?
It will be a very long answer because Cultural Forces is a big organization. It was created in June 2022, like a team of artists who joined the army on the first day, second day of the war as an infantry, and then understood that the art could be useful for the moral psychological state of the soldiers. On 12th of June 2022, it was the first team, like 5 people, and we began to do events, sessions, we call it sessions, on the front line. Right now we have 140 people. We have 8 groups which working on different parts of the front line. Every day, each group making about 2-3 concerts, or during the war we made more than 5,000 of them. With that, we have Exploring and Analytics Center, we have Production, Creative Group, and Cultural Forces International. This team, which you see here, is part of Cultural Forces International, which was created especially for sharing Ukrainian present, Ukrainian culture with our friends and supporters and partners abroad.
So why is it important to bring music and concerts to soldiers on the front line then, and how do they respond?
First, music is only one type of art which working straightly with your unconsciousness without any kind of analysis. That's why we can change the mood of the people very fast. But in Cultural Forces, we have not just musicians, we have amazing poets, we have even puppeteer.
Oh, wow.
5 of them, 5 puppeteers we have. They do puppet show. It is very useful and very effective genre because it helps to bring people in front of you to their childhood maybe, because in childhood always we watching these puppet shows and it impress us. So when we put some philosophy, some metaphors inside that, it works. So yeah, we have a lot of different genres.
And you joined the armed forces of Ukraine right at the beginning of the invasion, if I'm right?
On the second day.
Do you want to tell us a bit about what the last 3 years have been for you?
It is like big adventure with bad situations, very bad situations, with good situation, with a lot of tears and with a lot of smiles. So I can say that during the 3 years, my feeling that I lived few lives.
And one of these lives is playing music with these guys. Do you want to tell me a little bit about who's come with us today at the Telegraph?
Of course, here we see this guy, it's Taras Stolar. He is a bandura player. Bandura, it's Ukrainian traditional instrument. It has 62 strings, because this amount of strings can help to share all the depth of Ukrainian soul. In Russia, an example, they have balalaika, it's 3 strings. It's more than enough for them. Taras joined the army on the first day of the war. He served in intelligence. He was wounded, and we found him in hospital and invited the cultural forces. During this time, Taras played with Sting, U2, Bono. Metallica posted the video where Taras playing Nothing Else Matters for their subscribers.
I can't wait to see the faces in the Telegraph newsroom when Metallica on the Bandura comes through the studio walls.
It's Yuri Vaskevich. He's opera singer. He joined the army on the first day of the war, and during the counteroffensive attack previous summer, he lost his leg. And he actually perfectly singing in different languages, Italiano language or English. But with that, he doesn't speak English at all. He knows just one word, thanks. And when we toured in the United States and he sang few very important songs for United States, I came down from the stage and a lot of people around him and everybody tells something and he always sings, thanks. And people go home and thinking that he is perfectly speaker in English. But thanks is the most important word, and that's why we're here. We came to say thanks to the people for their support, for your support. It is very important for us. We know that you're the bigger supporter, because you're supporting us not with the brains, at first with your hearts, and we are very appreciated.
Well, it's an honor to be able to do that. Who else is in the band then?
Thank you. Yeah, it's Olga Rukavishnikova. She's violinist. She has master degree in violin and in violence. Because she has black belt karate.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, she joined the army on the 24 February 2022, infantry. She worked with machine gun, with grenade launcher. She was wounded 5 times, and she lost her eye on the front line. And one time, doctors said to her that she will never play violin again. But during our trip in the United States, she performed in Carnegie Hall with the big symphonic orchestra, and she played 2.5 hours a symphony by Beethoven and played it perfectly.
Your trip to the United States, where did you go and what was the impact of that? How did people respond when meeting you all and listening to your music?
It was like a very special operation because it was our first trip abroad. So before that, we lived like with the illusion that all the world supporting us. And when we came and understood that it's a lot of different problems, inside problems, political struggle, and etc. And Ukraine is not on the top of the list. We understood that right now, in this time, we need to get bigger support. An example, Republican audience almost doesn't know anything about us. And we understood that we have very short time to increase that. We create Cultural Forces International and made tour, which was in 2 parts. The first one was Rusty Belt, and another one was Bible Belt. And we've been in all the states, 266 concerts per 90 days. And we had just 1 day off. It was 5 of November, the day of elections. We performed, it was not usual concerts like big halls and selling tickets. No, we came with the tour of gratitude. And we performed in churches, in universities, in police stations, fire stations, on the streets. So we performed everywhere it was possible and reached that kind of audience, which maybe will not come to us to the normal concert.
So you mentioned some of the audience were Republican Americans who didn't know anything about Ukraine. It was very low on their priority list. They surely must have been curious enough to show up to the concert and meet you guys and listen to your music. What sort of questions, what sort of comments did you hear during these 2 tours? And do you feel like the current relationships with the US and the sort of, back and forth on the weapons and on the peace talks, did you kind of see that in the audience responses to you coming and performing for them?
We met very different audience. Mostly it was people who was ready to support Ukraine. But an example, we have few concerts where people was not ready for that. And we changed their mind. We don't need to have rational conversation to increase the convinces about Ukraine. Because when you see on the stage the guy who had all the possibilities to go abroad from Ukraine and have a job in opera in Italy, on etc. But he took the rifle and go defend his country, and even after he was wounded, he continued to do everything he can for the country. You feel all the level of senses at one time. You feel this, you don't hear this music, you feel with all your body. And with that, you see that she was wounded. You understand that it is difficult for her to play because of pieces of shrapnel, pieces of bomb in her body. But she continued doing that, and you understand everything about Ukrainian spirit. And you don't need to say, please support us because of that, because of that. No, you see everything here and now. So it's the power of cultures. It's the main card of our performances.
Has there been a place in Ukraine or a unit or a concert in particular that sticks in your mind?
I think each concert will be in my memory, in our memory forever, because it's always the people in front of you. It's when you come to a military unit, to the guys, when they just came out from the fight and they're exhausted, they don't want anything, just sleep, and you come to perform and you see, like, it's my feeling, but an example in front of you is the picture in 2D. And then you begin to play, you begin to speak, you begin to listen, and it became 3D. And you see the eyes of each one. You feel this, and this connection which created for 30, 40 minutes, and then you drinking tea together, they begin to tell you a lot of different stories, they begin to share you what is very important for them. An example, he could be before this with the confidence that I want to run away from here or something like that, and then he began to tell you why he is here. An example, we was in 36th Brigade a few weeks ago, 15 kilometers from the front line, little medical base, because it's 15 kilometers, it's in the zone reached by FPV drone, so it's a dangerous place, so that's why it's almost no lights to hide it's anybody inside. And it was wounded soldiers, and it was the girl with us, she's named Lilu45, it's her nickname, and she's singing songs, lyric songs. She's civilian, she's not military. She looked in their eyes and said, I don't know what to ask you. I don't know what even I can do, because before the war, before all these struggles and scary things, I thought that my music can heal the world. But right now I feel that it can't do that. And the guys begin to convince her that it's not true. Really, your music is healing us. And it was a very intimate moment. And when she finished, guys begin to tell different stories about their serving. And I remember one guy he said, like 6 months ago, I was mobilized. I wasn't volunteer, I was mobilized. And at first I think that I don't want to be in the army. But right now I understand that it is the most important part of my life. I became a man here. Every time I'm going to the position, I'm thinking about my brothers in arms. And every time I'm going back from the position, I'm thinking about my daughter. And it was so powerful words at that moment. And you understand that when he's sharing this, he convinced himself with his beliefs. And he knows that is these kind of main phrases which help him to get power when he's exhausted.
You did a very popular TV show in 2013 across Ukraine, but also Central European countries and also Russia. Yes. And you tried to appeal to Russian civilians to stand up against the war. How did that go, and what sort of responses did you encounter?
You know, in the beginning of the full-scale invasion, I used my Instagram. An example, in my Instagram, it was 76% Russian audience and 20 Ukrainian and 4 different countries. And at first I tried to speak with them, but I understood that it doesn't work. They don't want to rise up and change something. And when I understood that it will not have response, I changed my language, because before the war, full-scale invasion, I was Russian speaking. And I changed my language to Ukrainian, and from this time I speak just Ukrainian and English a little bit. I learned
English very well.
I began to delete Russian language from my memory to have more space for English. Good choice, I know.
I can't tell for the deleting of the Russian, but the updating of the English has gone very well.
Yeah, and I was disappointed because I thought that it's possible to reach this audience because for them, I was somebody like, I can't say the member of the family, but this TV show was shown at 11 in the morning on Sunday. So almost all the people watched this TV show with their families. I thought that it will work. It doesn't work. But it helps me to work on the front line with the soldiers because sometimes you come and they're in a combat zone with the losers, exhausted, and they see me, and in that moment, they're not there. They're on the kitchen with the children in front of TV and asking about different countries. Like an example, what happened in Himalaya or Vanuatu or Australia or New Zealand, an example. And using this request, you can help them to be in there, in that safe moment for a time. And when their imagination and their attention, an example, not here in Yakupinsk or Pokrovsk, they are in Patagonia, an example, on the mountains with me, with this adventure, they relax and they have a rest. So I understood that the best way to use this experience is not to speak with Russians, it's to use for healing with Ukrainian people.
At the beginning of the war, your audience on Instagram was 76 Russians. Has that changed? Have people...
Of course. Right now, 70 with something, it's Ukrainian, and about maybe 15-20% it's Ukrainians, but from other countries like Poland, Great Britain, Canada, United States.
Did you hear from your previous Russian audience when you started broadcasting content about Ukraine and about the war?
It's very strange because I lived in Russia for a few years. I had a lot of people with whom I spent my time. I can say friends. And almost nobody called or wrote me. And it was strange for me. And it's one of the points for being disappointed. But right now I understand why. We are very different, very different.
Just a final question from me, and then let's hear some music because I'm very eager to do that. We're all very aware on this podcast, and we've talked about it many times before, that this war is also about erasing Ukrainian identity, and that happens through culture as well. We've talked in the past about the massacre against the Kobzars in the 1930s by Stalin, which was an attack on traditional Ukrainian culture. To what extent do you understand yourselves, and do you feel like this cultural war is part of being on the front line and something that Ukraine has been involved in for decades, if not centuries?
Always Ukrainian culture was a little bit another type of culture than in other countries, because always in Ukraine, musicians shared their profession with fighting. That's why you can see a lot of pictures with Cossack Mamai, who's sitting under the tree with the kobza and playing. And with that, you see his gun and his sword. Bandura for him, kobza for him is kind of meditation. And actually, it's the real picture of Ukrainian culture. Kobza players were stranger musicians. A lot of them was blind, and they traveled from the village to the village and sang songs about Ukrainian resistance, about Ukrainian values, Ukrainian identity. So that's why there was enemies for Russians. And that's why in 1934, Russians invited everybody who playing kobza to the bigger kobza players to the festival and killed everybody and burned the instrument. After that, maybe you heard about the House of S. It was the house which was built in Kharkiv by Russian government, by Stalin, especially for the writers, for the poets, for the art establishment of that time. And they collected everybody in this house, and then everywhere was listeners, microphones.
So that's Slovo House, which we visited in our trip to Kharkiv.
Slovo House, yeah. And it's a very big problem for us, or for our culture, that the brightest, the most powerful Ukrainian artist was killed by Russians during all this time, and almost all of them was killed at the age 20 with something, 30 with something. But all of us know that first part of life, 33 years, artist is just a prism of his experience and talent. All the experiences go through this talent, and we have these products. Just after that, artists begin to grow up and understand the meaning of the reflexy, the meaning of sharing his knowledge. So just after 40 years, artist became a teacher for the next generations of artists. And if you kill artists at 30 years old, you will not have teacher for the next generation, and they will do the same mistakes. Actually, in Great Britain, it is very, very like step by step working in this direction, and that's why you are so powerful in your culture. That's why your culture is like Hamilton for the culture for all the world, and it's about the quality. So you understand like nobody else the meaning of the things, and the Russians understand that. So that's why they always try to kill and destroy our culture. And right now we came back this power to us, and the slogan of Cultural Forces is power to culture, culture to power, because we understand that our artists need to concentrate their power inside their hands and understand the power of their art. And our power, our army, an example, need to understand the meaning of culture, how it increased their gains, how it increased their values, and how it bringing doings, deals together to the same goal.
Well, Mikolai, thank you so much for joining us on Ukraine the Latest. It's been wonderful hearing your insights, and now I can't wait to hear the music itself. So, live from the Telegraph studios, let's hear some of the music that's toured the world and brought Ukrainian culture to life when you're ready.
It's the song which was written actually in Odessa, in the Ukrainian city. It's my hometown city. It's called «O Sole Mio» by Pavarotti.
O sole mio, sta in fronte a te. Sta in fronte a te.
Wow.
I'm blushing. I don't think the Telegraph has seen a serenade in a very long time or ever. Thank you so much. It was wonderful.
Joe, have you got any final thoughts for us?
Just a few, just to touch on the Trump weapons schemes, this idea that NATO is going to buy weapons using European money, as you fantastically set out. Italy and France have basically said no, and I don't know how you say no in Italian, so probably no as well.
No, I think.
No. I spoke to the Czech foreign minister yesterday. He said that he didn't rule out Czech participation, but he said, look, there are no decisions yet. We're already participating in so many mechanisms that there is currently not a discussion on new resources. So I think we're going to find in the next few days that there's lots of countries that either can't because of what was being asked, like lots of countries donate from their stockpiles and rely on that money to be reimbursed from various different pots, or they're already, I think the Czech foreign minister was actually saying that we are involved in lots of these mechanisms. The Czech lead mightily successful coalition of international allies to get artillery ammunition into Ukraine. So last year they managed to club together enough money to buy 1.5 million rounds of artillery for Ukraine, various different sizes. And this year they're set to deliver over 2 million. So basically he was saying, look, we haven't made a decision yet, but maybe we can't stretch ourselves. So I think the arguments from France and Italy are, look, we probably can't just afford to give cash to the scheme. Like, we donate stuff from our stockpiles, and they don't have any American weapons in their stockpiles, or if they do, very, very few that Ukraine needs. And then the other point was quite interesting, to speaking to a Western official in Brussels yesterday. One of the reasons they cited, which didn't make the Washington Post, was actually financial. And it sounds like Donald Trump has had someone whisper in his ear. So this is not double source, this is more speculation. But someone whispered in Donald Trump's ear to suggest, while you ask Europe to spend more on defense and more on Ukraine, and you distance yourself from this war, this invasion, that means Europe is only going to go about bolstering its own production of weapons and basically not buy as much from European manufacturers. And what does that do? That cuts out potential revenue for Donald Trump. Donald Trump, first and foremost, is a businessman. He's very transactional. So what support for Ukraine, everyone, I think, is unanimous in saying it's a good thing, because it's going to open up potentially the door for lots of Patriot systems, which are fantastic, potentially missiles, we don't know, various different, is it going to be GIMLRs for the missiles used in HIMARS and those multiple launch rocket systems? Well, that's all fantastic, and America's needed for that stuff, because America produces stuff that other countries don't. Donald Trump has maybe used this to basically create a new revenue stream for him, which is fantastic. It works both ways. It helps Ukraine, but it also is transactional in the fact that it boosts the American coffers, because these companies are paying tax to him. So yeah, that's just a different avenue and looking at why Donald Trump took that decision to finally support Ukraine more than Russia. Because I think he was banking on Russia ending the war, Vladimir Putin sort of opening up various different trade routes with America, which have been closed because of sanctions and various different things since the start of the full-scale invasion. Is there mineral deals to be done with Russia, etc.? But now Donald Trump sees that as not a way to make money and get a quick deal. He's looking for maybe Europe to sort of pay into his weapons manufacturing.
Ukraine the Latest is an original podcast from The Telegraph, created by David Knowles. To support our work and stay on top of all of our Ukraine news analysis and dispatches from the ground, please subscribe to The Telegraph. You can get 1 month free, then 2 months for just £1 at www.telegraph.co.uk/Ukraine the latest. Deploying cutting-edge technology, we also release Ukrainian and Russian versions of this podcast. These translations retain our voices and delivery so that it can reach listeners in every region of Ukraine and in those parts of Eastern Europe where Russian is still widely spoken. Links to those can be found in the podcast description to this episode. You can also now sign up to the new Ukraine the Latest newsletter. Each week, Dom Nichols and Francis Durnley answer your questions, provide recommended reading, and give exclusive analysis and behind-the-scenes insights. Plus, maps of the front lines and diagrams of weapons to complement our daily reporting. It's free for everyone, including non-subscribers. You can find the link to sign up in the description to this episode. We regularly have a Ukraine live blog on our website, where you can follow updates as they come in throughout the day, including insights from regular contributors to this podcast. We also do the same for other breaking international stories. If you appreciated this podcast, please consider following Ukraine the Latest on your preferred podcast app, and leave us a review, as it really helps others find the show. Please also share it with those who may not be aware we exist. You can listen to this conversation live at 1 p.m. London time each day on X Spaces. Follow The Telegraph so you don't miss it. You can also get in touch directly to ask questions or give comments by emailing ukrainepod@telegraph.co.uk. We continue to read every message. You can also contact us directly on X. You can find our handles in the description for this episode. As ever, we're especially interested to hear where you're listening from around the world. Ukraine the Latest was today produced by Phil Atkins. Executive producers are Francis Durnley, Louisa Wells and David Knowles.
My name is David Knowles. Thank you all for listening. Goodbye.